Okay, well, thank you, everyone. So just mindful of everyone's busy times, we'll get started. So good morning, everyone. I'm Rana Jawad. I'm Professor of Global Social Policy at the University of Birmingham and co-convener of the MENA Social Policy Network. I'm really pleased that we're coming together for this dissemination webinar. This is the first of its kind that we are holding. Before I just give the floor to my colleagues to introduce themselves, and just really want to thank all the team effort that's gone into organizing this event, I'll just very briefly explain the background of today's session. So we've been working on a project which is exploring the relationship between social policy and conflict prevention in the MENA region. This project started in 2020 at the University of Bath, which is where I was previously, and is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the UK. It encompasses a wide range of activities, and I would just highlight the two research ones, which are that we were able to commission research around this topic area, and we continue to oversee ongoing research. And we've also, as a project team, been able to undertake proof of concepts, feasibility studies, building on the existing expertise of project members in peace and security studies, and also in social policy areas of work in the MENA region. Some of us are coming from outside of the MENA region as well, so we've been able to bring in a broad comparative perspective to this area of research, which on first impressions, or perhaps confirmed by yourselves, seems to be still a very new area of work that policymakers and researchers are still trying to build bridges. So this event is the first whereby we are beginning to share findings from this project, and we hope to hold more events of this sort going forward. We ran a few initial stakeholder meetings in Lebanon and Jordan in the last couple of years to introduce the project, and we're now in a position to be able to share some of our emerging findings. The project ends in 2025, but hopefully will be quite active in the remaining time period, showcasing not just what our team members are doing, but equally what our award holders are doing. And at the heart of this dissemination process is the production of a policy briefing. And based on this policy briefing that comes out of the project, of course, and the research that's been done, we will aim to organize an online webinar of this sort. So more to come, and thank you again for joining us. I would now like to move to introduce our speaker. So very pleased to introduce Professor Timo Kivimäki, who's been a key member of our project and a colleague at the University of Bath, and he will be leading this and spearheading this initiative by sharing with us his initial research, some of which has already been published. So there's a lot that can be said about Timo. I think we've been really privileged to have his expertise and his insights and guidance in this project. And I know I won't do him justice when I introduce him, so I'll just say in a few words, Timo is Professor of International Relations at the University of Bath and Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Sejong Institute in Seoul, the Republic of Korea. He joined Bath in 2015, having previously held professorships at the universities of Helsinki, Lapland and Copenhagen. He's also been the director of the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies in Copenhagen and the Institute of Development Studies of the University of Helsinki. He described himself as being purely academic, but he does really amazing policy relevant work. And I would just highlight his very close association with the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Marty Ahtisaari. I know we've all heard of him, who sadly died recently, and who praised Timo's work as an advisor to the Finnish government in terms of the peace processes in Indonesia and in Myanmar. So we are very honored to have Timo with us, presenting some of his work on state fragility and I will hand over now to him. Thank you very much, Timo, and welcome. I think the general format is that you have about, is it 20 minutes to half an hour? I've lost track of that. Yes, and then we'd like to open up to questions. We are a small group, and I think that's good in a way, because we would really welcome in-depth interaction and exchanges with yourselves, our audience, who yourselves have a lot of experience on these topics. So please don't be shy, and let's support Timo with our feedback and comments, because that will be very helpful to strengthen the cumulative work that we're doing together. Thank you all. Over to you, Timo, please.
Thanks very much, Rana, and thanks for everybody for being here. It's nicer to talk to people than
I think you're in silent. Okay.
Let's see. No, I'm not in silent mode. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You're
okay.
good.
Sorry, can we?
Good.
We can't hear you, Timo.
Oh, we can. I think it might just be you, Rana.
Oh, apologies. Okay.
Okay, so what I'm going to say, in addition to thanking again Rana, who didn't hear me before, is that this study is part of this project that Rana explained, but it's also mainly part of a special issue that this project produced on fragility, grievances, and conflict triangle in the Middle East. And my focus is in state fragility and economic grievances and how they affect organized violence. Now, state fragility means basically lack of, let's add Talib into the talk. So it means lack of legitimacy and lack of efficiency of state management in security, politics, political, economic, and social affairs. And I'm using a state fragility index to measure fragility of states. Now, obviously, when I look at the relationship between conflict and fragility, I have to exclude the data on management of security, because that's partly then analytically identical with the definition of conflict. And now, then, when I talk about conflict, I actually mean organized violence, which is not just conflict, but it is also conflict where state participates, but it's also conflict where state doesn't participate, and it's also one-sided violence where instead of two armed groups or several armed groups, there is also violence against civilians. And now here, when I look at the amount of violence, I look at fatalities of such violence per population. The interesting thing in this project, especially in this specific part of the project, is that there is a replication data depository, which you can see there, where I have included all the data that I use for my conclusions, and also the code with which I have created the data from existing data sources. So that's the context, and what we did was that we first explored quantitatively the relationship between fragility, grievances, and conflict, and then we looked at different qualitative case studies and also some quantitative case studies to kind of explain the plausible kind of causal paths from fragility to conflict. Let me see, how do I? No, I don't seem to be. able to move this. I'll stop sharing and share again. Okay. Okay, so then the first finding that I made was that indeed state fragility predicts fatalities of organized violence very well. And this is not something strange in the sense which is because of the fact that this is a global finding. Here I have graphs both on MENA situation here and world situation above. And clearly you can easily see that if you look at countries that are not fragile at all, they don't have organized violence almost at all, whereas countries that are most fragile tend to have a lot. But what's interesting here is that somewhere in the middle, there's more fatalities of organized violence than in either of the ends, extreme ends, and it's difficult to say why this is the case, but it may be because of two reasons. State fragility tends to be very closely associated with poverty, and when state fragility has kind of created an extremely poor country, there's little to fight for. As a result, the absolutely poor countries don't have quite as much fatalities of organized violence than as do the poor countries who are not desperately poor. The other possibility is that in some cases state fragility means absolute dictatorship, and in absolute dictatorships there's a lot of control, which may make mobilization for violence difficult. Now the second finding is specification of this problem of fragility. Namely, it seems that political legitimacy is what predicts conflict, and in political legitimacy problems there is the problem of factionalization, and this is something that explains 41% of the variation in fatalities of organized violence. So it's a huge explanation to conflicts, especially in MENA. And this is interesting because the fact that this is not the case globally. It is quite clear that state factionalism is more prominent explanation to conflict and violence in the MENA region than anywhere else. Now, by state factionalism, I mean that citizens perceive that the state is not an instrument of the whole people, but instead it's an instrument of one faction. And on the other hand, state factionalism is also the reality of some groups using the state for their subnational benefits. Now, why factionalism helps? Why factionalism predicts conflict? Some of our more qualitative and specific, country-specific studies really revealed some of the causal paths. And one was clearly that violent mobilization is easier when you have factions. Then you can identify outgroups that you target your violence against. So that's one important faction. The other seems to be that mediation of dispute is difficult when you have factions, and that's something that was also found by one of the researchers in the special issue in social sciences. It seems also that the overall weakness of state efficiency and legitimacy reduces states' ability to contain opportunities and regulate economic and political competition, and that's closely related to factionalization. Now, if we then look at the statistics, we can see that the least the countries with least state fragmentation and state factionalism do not have much conflict, whereas quite clear that more factionalization means more fatalities of conflict. Now, the other very important finding was that corruption is a very, very strong explanation to conflict in the MENA region. This is not as surprising as the role of factionalism, because the fact that corruption predicts conflict everywhere. It does predict more in the MENA region, and this seems also that while globally there hasn't been any change in how much corruption predicts conflict, in MENA, corruption has become more important predictor. Here I have also the Transparency International definition of corruption, and I have used Transparency International data for the calculation of the relationship between corruption and conflict. But so factionalism and corruption are the main two explanations. Now, an interesting finding also was that humanitarian interventions tend to weaken states and increase factionalism, and this, as we know, then escalates organized violence. Military interventions tend to increase corruption as well, but of course then that depends very much on what kind of intervention we are looking at. Now, one of the reasons why military intervention, especially unilateral military interventions, make situation worse, is that often they are conducted with the idea of bringing accountability to atrocity criminals. So often we have decided these guys are the bad guys and the other guys are good guys, and obviously that by definition is increasing factionalism, because then you have the good guys and bad guys. Now the other thing is that when one assumes that you can fix problems by punishing the perpetrators of violence, then your focus is on the justice for the perpetrator. And as a result, often you don't focus on the justice for the victim, and there tends to be clear indications that the latter would be a better approach. Now, why this is then the case? Partly also because of the fact that powerful interventions tend to utilize warlords and kind of local power holders, and often when they are secretly financed, this finance creates corruption and cash economy, and this tends to fuel violence. Talib Al-Khair, who I guess is in the call now, found also that that interventions tend to make the job of orators of terrorism easier, because they tend to create factions, the outgroups that are needed. Also, they tend to create the threat and panic that we have then later found as a very important element of success of violent mobilization. What we found in a further research was that hatred and disputes do not really motivate terrorist violence in the MENA region. We looked at Syria and Iraq. Hatred and dispute in terrorist discourse did not predict successful mobilization of violence, whereas once terrorists managed to create a perception of threat from a group, that's when mobilization was very successful. As a result, it's quite clear that interventions increased the number of fatalities, and I also controlled the time effect. So it was so that intervention first, and then followed the increase of fatalities. Obviously, it went the other way around as well, because of course, in more serious conflicts, there's a greater likelihood of interventions. But it's quite clear that if we look at how the number of fatalities changes, we can see that interventions, conflicts that are being intervened from outside tend to create more fatalities of violence. So, and then finally, we've discovered several more difficult things to explain. What we found, for example, was that while organized violence and corruption and factionalism led to developmental grievances, the relationship, the effect of developmental grievances was much more indirect. So while in the world it's quite clear that developmental grievances do predict organized violence, this is not as clear in the MENA region, and partly in more specific country-specific analysis, we realized that this is partly related to the fact that grievances are more political often in the MENA region, and some of the economic grievances are expressed in political fashion, and often the real economy that matters is informal and therefore difficult to find in economic statistics. So that's why it tends to be more complicated. Now, if we then try to see what kind of prescriptions we can derive from all of this, I think it's quite clear that international action in the MENA region should not weaken the state, not even the bad states. I think it would be much better to support state development into a better direction together with different groups, rather than fighting against factions and fighting against bad states. This is because of the fact that in the long run, it is the state that controls economic and political competition. It is the state that eventually contains violence. So if we do too much damage on the state, like in Libya, we will end up in a situation where a state will have to be built again before we can find any more peaceful solutions. So bad states tend to be better than no state at all if we look at the effect on fatalities of conflict. Now, the other thing that we clearly can see is that if our action aims to foster peace, then it needs to focus on factionalism and corruption. Aid should try to be as transparent as possible. It should promote transparency and equality between different groups. This is very important because of the prominence of factionalism in the explanation of conflict in the Middle East. All in all, I think we should avoid unilateral military interventions, which is something that we haven't been doing MENA region is the region where we have military interventions more often than elsewhere. If military power is needed, then the UN is often much better alternative because of the fact that UN is seen as being owned by everybody, and therefore it's not an external force that can motivate resistance. If such is not available, then do nothing. It's better not to do anything than to do something that harms the situation, and military operations tend to harm the situation. Now then finally, indirect, I mean, if we don't intervene militarily, we may have a kind of temptation to support militarily some warlords and some factions. Obviously, this seems to be the worst we can do because of the fact that that both increases factionalization and it tends to increase corruption. So that's an absolute no-no. I think we shouldn't be doing that either. So these are the prescriptions that one can draw on the basis of very relatively tentative analysis on how grievances and state factionalism and state fragility affects conflict. Thanks. That's all.